You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Generally peaceful po ang ating eleksyon sa buong bansa. Bagamat mayroong mga iilan na mga insidente ng karahasan na nangyari lalong-lalo na sa Bangsamoro.
You just heard Comelec Commissioner George Garcia sharing his assessment on the now concluded 2023 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections around the country. Generally peaceful daw ang halalan this year. Isolated incidents lang daw ang mga kaso ng karahasan. But in this episode, we'll take you to the one area where the democratic process didn't run as smoothly.
Lahat ng regions ay 100% na except yung Bangsamoro. Yung ating proclamation na lang ang 92.7%. So ito po mamayang hapon makukumpleto na natin, especially kapag napaboto na natin yung lahat ng 5 barangays natin. Except of course, hindi tayo pwede mag-proclaim.
I'm Franco Luna, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News.
We can speak based on our data, Franco. Siguro, let's say, we've been recording like 200 reports of violence for election-related incidents. And I'm not so sure what isolated means because nakikita kasi natin kung saan yung mga areas na hotspots. And most of the time, especially across the Bangsamoro or more specifically dito sa mainland. So, for example, it's been happening even pre-election.
Yan si Lizelle Bugday. She's Senior Program Director for Early Response with the Council for Climate and Conflict Action Asia. She was talking about the results of their critical events monitoring system in the wake of the 2023 Barangay and Sangguniang Kabataan elections in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao. For the much-delayed elections, millions of Filipinos flocked to polling centers around the country to vote for village and youth leaders for the first time since 2018. And around 672,000 seats were up for grabs in the November polls. But the report found that the 2023 BSK elections were the bloodiest in Muslim Mindanao in the past decade, with 11 deaths recorded in the Bangsamoro and adjacent areas on election day alone. More than 30 people were also injured in 57 incidents of collective violence. When we wrote this episode, the death toll had shot up to 29. However, it is important to contextualize that the violence in the region didn't just start on election day.
We've always seen shooting incidents happening in BARM. It's important for us to identify who are the actors involved because that will point us that, this can be related to election already. Part na to ng mga girian sa pagsisimula pa lang. So it started even during the registration process ng voters. For example, it started to intensify from the voters registration hanggang doon sa actual filing of candidacy. So one report, it happened in one town in Lanao del Sur na during filing ng candidacy, may explosion na nangyari malapit doon kung saan the registration is taking place. So part yun ng mga strategy para hindi na mag-file ng candidacy yung mga rivals nila.
There are a number of factors that contributed to the violence, including inadequate security arrangements, weak response protocols, and the presence of armed groups in polling precincts. And that matters because
at least half or 1/3 of the barangay elections na walang natin election, peaceful, mga at the post, yung karamihan din. Otherwise, kung lahat nag-election, baka mas matindi mangyari. Ang effect lang din yung mga nasettle na mga election. Nasettle nga peacefully, pero ang naging effect naman doon sa karamihan ng tao, walang choice. So, nawala yung democratic process ba?
that was Macmillan Lucman, Executive Director of the Early Response Network for Resiliency and Peace Incorporated. Violence was recorded all over the region and not just in isolated cities. On their approach to a roadside polling place in Maguindanao del Norte, 4 people were injured and 2 supporters of a candidate for village chairman were slain. In Lanao del Sur, a barangay captain's spouse lost his life after being shot in the chest while engaged in combat with his spouse's rival. The morning of the elections was welcomed by the tragic deaths of 2 people in the village of Bugawas in Datu Odin Sinsuat when they were on their way to their polling precincts. Meanwhile, in Butig, Lanao del Sur, a village head aspirant was shot dead by his own brother due to an altercation. The victim was aiming to replace his wife, who was finishing her term as the incumbent chairwoman in the barangay.
Ang BARM have been declared as election hotspot not only for the previous two elections under BARM, but even before BARM, nung nasa ARM pa, ay ganun din katindi yung problema sa elections. Now, maybe this is because of the cultural aspect, tribalism sa amin na mas talagang malakas.
We're pausing for a quick break now. When we return, we'll tell you about what this all means for the upcoming 2025 elections.
Doon naman sa nagkatak ng election, doon pa lang po sa umpisa, i-distribute yung paraphernalia before 7 o'clock, mag-election ng 7 hanggang 3 o'clock. Hindi nangyayari kasi marami ng bangayan talaga doon sa loob.
Again, that was Macmillan Lucman, Executive Director of the Early Response Network. He was talking about his own experience monitoring on the ground on Election Day.
Sir Franco, sino bang hindi natatakot din? Pag nagkakabangayan na, pag may mga putok na, pati mga pulis, mga sundalo nagtatago, ayun, mamatay. Tapos paano yung electorate? Mag-uwian na lang, hindi na boboto. So yung ayaw ng gulo, ayaw mag-isaw-saw, hindi na boboto.
Elections in the Bangsamoro region have historically gone violent, even down to the level of barangays. But the bigger story is that even when people aren't injured or killed, they're discouraged from coming out to vote altogether, because these cases have created an environment of fear.
Usually kasi ang alam natin dyan sa Bangsamoro, Sir Maklipo ba, magkakasabay yung buong pamilya pupunta ng polling precinct para bumoto. So usually nagiging target din. So talagang lahat sila ay may strategies na ginagawa to ensure their safety. We saw one report, for example, nangyari din sa Maguindanao, sa Dato Udin Sinsuat, na isang armed group blinak niya yung highway para hindi na makaboto yung mga voters dun sa area na yon. And halos nagiging normal na yung suntukan, rambulan dun mismo sa polling precincts.
The fears were to the point that around 2,000 teachers who were supposed to assist in the elections didn't bother showing up to work altogether. It affects everyone, from voters to teachers and to candidates.
Yun talaga ang palagi namin nakikita na the violence really hampered their rights. We've received many reports from the non-Moro indigenous peoples areas, that is in South UP, dyan na area. Itong mga Tedoray at Lambangian, sila yung isa sa mga nakita namin na halos marami sa kanila ang hindi nakaboto kasi grabe talaga yung harassments against them. As well as kahit yung iba na gusto sanang mag-file ng candidacy to represent their barangay, hindi rin kahit sa filing pa lang. Kasi itong mga Tedoray Lambangian, kahit way before election pa, ay talagang marami ng harassments din kasi nangyayari sa kanila.
Macmillan has actually experienced this violence himself.
Pero hindi nangyari dito sa last election. Doon ako sa group, buboto kami. Pero yung isang grupo, nagsuntukan. Then ako tinamaan ako. Pero gusto ko pa rin silang awatin. Pero naisip ko na baka masuntok uli ako. Kaya umalis ako. Pagtalikod ko, tama-tama yung pamangkin ko. Kasi nakita daw niya ako. Nag-rush sa amin, susuntokin yung kabila. Pero at least naawat ko siya. Now, ang effect nung nagsuntukan, sir, bago lang yan na-settle kasi ito was 1998 ata yun. 4 na namatay sa magkabila.
And advocates like Lizelle and Macmillan are only expecting a repeat in 2025 for a very specific reason.
Ang problema natin ngayon, yung assessment namin ay if dalhin natin sa 2025 election, mas problematic yun because marami ng players na involved, particularly in 2025 na ang MILF ay magpa-participate.
That's right, the MILF will be represented in those elections under their political wing, the United Bangsamoro Justice Party, which means the Comelec should be doing something now.
So we saw na mukhang inadequate nga yung number ng security troops na nalagay nga. Sabi nga natin, it's been hotspots for so long, especially from our end, with our data, we saw that this is nga ang pinaka-violent in the last decade. So we saw nga na kailangan talagang nabigyan sana ng special focus yung BARM na sana we saw na yung ibang hotspots sa Pilipinas ay binisita beforehand. So dapat may special focus talaga, may special mechanisms na ginawa sana to reduce lang the level of violence during elections.
Now the question is, what must be done to prevent electoral violence in 2025? Security is a start. The government supposedly deployed 14,000 soldiers and cops in BARM, but the report says that might not have been enough considering the outcome, even with all the time to prepare. Prevention is always better than a cure, and the report also recommends that the PNP's Oplan Katok, or house-to-house campaign, be strengthened to encourage firearms owners to renew and register their weapons. The report also suggested that government authorities must reach out to traditional religious and credible community leaders to start brokering peaceful arrangements among rival groups weeks before the elections. Here's Macmillan Lokman again on why we should all be paying attention to what's happening in BARM, in his words.
Sir, ang BARM naman still a part of the country. And ang lahat na ginagamit niya na mga sweldo, lahat-lahat, everything ay galing sa Pilipinas. Yung black grant na pinag-uusapan sa BARM ay galing sa Pilipinas. So, yung pa lang, sir, dapat sayang naman yung resources. And it's also affecting mga adjacent municipalities outside BARM. Tignan mo ngayon, ang Sultan Kudarat is not part of BARM, pero pinapasok nila mga dato. So, ang Lanao del Sur din, malapit sa Lanao del Norte. At yung mga incidents dyan din na violent incidents sa mga Muslim region. Dapat ito pang tinutulungan.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was edited by Freddy Blanco. Our Teka Teka News executive producer is Jill Caro, and our senior editor is Veronica Uy. If you found this episode useful, share it with a friend. Help Teka Teka News reach more people and keep the show going. Thanks for listening.